only reason I applied to be a TEDx speaker is because the theme for this year is identity. The irony being that the more of my talk I was writing, the more I realised that I still have absolutely no idea who I am. For my entire life, my identity's been built around my career. That is until April of last year, when I decided, a little bit by accident, to throw my career in the bin. It took me to the age of 31 to make the first decision of my adult life that was for me and me only. I moved to Perthshire for what I thought was going to be my dream job, but which very much turned out not to be. I was there for only 3.5 months before I resigned without even having a job to go on to. At first, it just felt like a holiday. Time off. So 4 days later, I got on the back of my partner Gary's motorbike like I'd done so many times before. It was the perfect weather that morning. I can even remember taking photos of the sunrise. We were all kitted up, ready to make the 200-mile round trip across to Loch Goilhead on the west coast of Scotland to visit this cute little cafe that I'd seen online. It's got this beautiful outdoor decking with fairy lights, and it looks out over the hills and the water. I had been wanting to go there for months, so I can't even tell you how excited I was to be finally getting to go. But we didn't quite make it there. We were only about half an hour into the journey, somewhere along the A85, the road between Perth and Crieff, when we hit the back of a car that stopped dead in front of us. Gary went over the handlebars, and I went over the top of him. Gary's friend Bunga was on the bike behind us and saw the whole thing, said that I went higher than the car through the air. We were all wearing these in-ear headpieces so that we could talk to each other. So all they could hear was me lying there on the road, screaming. At first, I thought I'd broken every rib in my body, and I was just hoping that it wasn't my back. And at that point, I didn't even know where Gary was, whether he was even still alive. But then suddenly he was stood there above me, making sure that I was all right, until he realised how much pain he was in and collapsed into the ditch beside me. Time moves in a really weird way when you're in that kind of accident, and I can just remember flashes of things happening around me. The driver of the car on the phone to the ambulance, somebody sweeping bits of broken bike off the road, a junior doctor crouched down beside Gary speaking about a suspected broken hip or pelvis. The air ambulance got called and it was going to be landing in the field beside us. And I think that's when I realised how serious this was. But all I could think about was that I'd left the dog at home by himself. So I rang my mum, who lived 2 hours away, to tell her that she was going to need to come and look after him, because I didn't know when or if we were going to get home. Gary's lips started turning blue, and I remember lying there with my arms stretched out towards him, but I couldn't quite reach, and they wouldn't let me move. They wouldn't let me need him. I was so scared that he was going to die. All I cared about was going in the ambulance with him, but they wouldn't let me do that either. He went in his ambulance, and I went in mine. An experience like that shakes up more than just your body. It shook me to the core, and that's when I knew that I wanted to live my life a little bit differently. Up until that point, I had what I thought was a relatively good career. I wasn't a teacher or a lawyer like my parents might have wanted, but I'd worked my way up into management roles, and I had a job title that at least I felt proud of. But I was still somehow on a career path that was for somebody else's benefit. I've actually been quite lucky in that I've mostly enjoyed the jobs that I've done, The problem was they just weren't the jobs that I wanted. Except I didn't know what I wanted because I didn't know who I was. I kept asking myself, who am I? Who am I? I can't even tell you how many times I've asked myself that same question. It always reminds me of the big blue caterpillar in Alice in Wonderland when he asks, "Who are you?" to Alice. And Alice replies, "Why, I hardly know. I've changed so many times since this morning, you see." Alice had absolutely no idea who she was, and neither did I. I think that's why I resonate so much with that story, because she's just bumbling along in this weird little world, trying to figure out who she is and how she fits into all of that. All I ever cared about was fitting in. I got bullied the whole way through school. I got bullied for having a bald patch on the crown of my head when I had alopecia. I got bullied for wearing glasses. I got bullied for using a pink fluffy pen on the first day of secondary school, and I loved that pen. It lit up and everything. I got bullied for not having designer clothes and for not having the right designer clothes. And I can even remember a time in primary school when a girl made the entire class stand at the opposite side of the playground from me. So I changed who I was because I'd convinced myself that who I was wasn't enough. I pretended to be somebody that I wasn't, and without even meaning to, became somebody else entirely. Somebody that I didn't even recognize. Somebody that I thought other people wanted me to be. I got rid of that pink fluffy pen. I changed my glasses to contact lenses. I started wearing plain clothes to blend in. And I answered questions with things like, "It's up to you. I don't mind. What do you want to do?" Instead of thinking about what I wanted for myself. I didn't know what I wanted, not even for breakfast, because I just didn't know who I was. I changed myself so much that if I showed you pictures of me from back then, you would not even recognize me. I hid behind 3-inch thick layers of Maybelline Dream Matte Mousse, fake tan and acrylic nails. I had expensive blonde highlights and eyelash extensions that were so heavy I could barely open my eyes. I cared so much about what other people thought, whether they liked me, that I didn't stop to think about whether I liked them. It was a physical mask that I'd built up around myself, but there was emotional armor there too. I locked away all of the parts of myself that I just didn't think were worthy of attention. I didn't even let myself cry. But this was somehow the version of me that I thought was going to fit in. Finally. But what I didn't realize is that I couldn't fit in if I wasn't really being myself. Because then it's not me that's fitting in. It's the version of me that I was pretending to be, which wasn't really me at all. It shouldn't take a serious accident to bring you back to who you are. But for me, it did. For somebody else, that might be the death of a loved one or a life-changing illness. It could be the end of a long-term relationship, divorce. There's so many things that can happen in any single one of our lives that might make you stop and think about your own life for a moment. But what I learned from my experience is that I just didn't want to keep living somebody else's story because I was too scared to live my own life. One of the first questions people often ask when you meet someone new is, "What is it that you do for work?" I would like to say that my career has never been the most interesting thing about me. But for a long time, it was the only thing I cared about. But now, to me, identity is about so much more than what we do for a job. It's who you really are. who you would be if you weren't trying to please anyone else, or you weren't afraid of their judgment. Except when I gave up my career, I lost not only my job, I lost my entire sense of identity because I was trying to please everyone else and I was afraid of their judgment. Even now, I still try to justify who I am by telling people what I used to do for work. Because for the last year, I've worked in a very different way than I ever have before. And a lot of that time, it's felt as though I wasn't working at all, which to some people might sound like the absolute dream. But to me, as someone who's spent my entire life building my identity around my career, it's actually been quite hard to slow down because I didn't ever used to. I worked relentlessly. I only ever took time off if I had plans to do something else, otherwise I just didn't see the point. I didn't know the meaning of the word rest. I was blinded by busyness, keeping myself distracted from who I was because I wasn't who I wanted to be. Then the accident forced me to not only slow down, it brought me to a complete stop. I've never spent so much time alone as I have over this last 15 months. There were times when I didn't see a single other person for sometimes 10 or 11 days. I know more about the habits of spiders and snails than I probably should. And I was spending up to 12 hours a day on my phone, desperate for connection. There were times that I would just lie in bed and stare at the plain cream wall for hours and hours because I just thought I had nothing worth getting up for. I was lonely. I was lost. But I didn't want to go out and meet new people because I was scared of being asked what I did for work, because I just didn't know what to say. That's when I decided that I didn't want to live life the way that I thought I should anymore. I started doing the things that I'd never let myself do before. I started doing the things that made me happy. And even though the type of work that I do now means more to me than anything I've ever done and is something I'm hugely passionate about, it's not exactly what society might see as a success. And so sometimes I still find it quite hard to answer that question of what it is that I do for work. It's still hard, and it's still scary, and I'm still figuring it out. But my life is at least my choice now. I did the things that were scary because to me, there's nothing scarier than getting to the end of your life filled with regret. There's so many labels and identities that we try to belong to. Whether it's gender, sexuality, the colour of our skin or our race. Maybe it's a different kind of label. Being a parent, a partner, a boss or an employee. But do I have to fit into any? Why does everything have to come in the shape of a box? I've spent my entire life trying to fit my complicated, messy self into this neat little square, and I just don't want to do that anymore. We both survived that motorbike accident. We were battered and we were bruised, but we both walked out of that hospital with not a single broken bone in either of our bodies. Something I can only describe now as an absolute miracle. But it's still changed my life. I've still never been to that beautiful little cafe on the west coast of Scotland. But at least now, when I'm asked that dreaded question of what it is that I do for work, I can say a number of different things. But the most important thing is that I have a choice. I can choose my own label. Thank you.